Welcome to WatchMojo.com. Today we are counting down the picks for the top 10 Linux distros on DistroWatch. Number 10, Deepin. Number 9, Zorn. Number 8, Fedora. Number 7, Solus. Number 6, Elementary. Number 5, Ubuntu. Number 4, Debian. Number 3, Mint. And number 2, Manjaro. Before we unveil our number 1 pick, here are some honorable mentions.
Ah, come on. No one cares about your honorable mentions.
There are tons of Linux distributions, and this year I have tried 17 of them. Since I didn't try that many distros this year, I'm not going to make decisions for the awards. Instead, I asked a bunch of questions in Discord and the YouTube community tab to decide what distros to add to a poll. Then I added a bunch of polls to the YouTube community tab to vote for the winner of the category. So let's see what distros won their respective awards. Our first award is going to the most beautiful looking distro. Our candidates are Elementary, Deepin, Zorn, Pop! OS, and Farron OS. Elementary OS uses a skeuomorphic theme as opposed to a flat theme, meaning a lot of things look similar to how they do in real life. A lot of people prefer flat themes, however, a lot of people also like the look of Elementary OS. Deepin is pretty flat looking, but it has blur everywhere, and a lot of people, including me, personally think that this is one of the most beautiful Linux distributions by far. Zorn OS uses a pretty flat theme, but it also supports accent colors in its light theme, meaning you can kind of change the colors around in the theme if you don't like it. However, its dark themes have the accent colors add a tint to the background, which I'm not a fan of, although some other people do like it. A couple of people suggested Pop! OS when asking for candidates, so I added it. It looks interesting, and although its window borders kind of look like a weird mix of orange and gray. I don't hate it, but I don't like it either. I will say that its wallpapers suck though. Our final candidate is Farron OS. Farron OS is another distro with a flat theme, and it looks pretty good. It used to be like pitch white, but people complained about it and the developer listened. Farron OS, like Zorn, also lets you create accent colors for the themes. While Farron isn't the most beautiful, its theme is very easy to customize, and it has some tools for customizing its theme, including the colorizer, which allows you to change the accent colors, and of course, since it's Plasma based, you can easily configure the theme through Plasma. The winner for this award is Deepin with 36% of the votes. Zorn OS and Elementary both got 21% of the votes, while Pop! OS got 13% and Farron got 9%. The Farron OS developer watches my videos, so this is awkward. Deepin also won last year, which means that it's a Deepin also won last year, which means it's the consecutive winner. Next up, we have the best lightweight distro. These are distros that have the best balance between how lightweight it is, but also usability. Our presidential candidates are Lubuntu, Xubuntu, Meanbuntu, Peppermint OS, Linux Lite, and Zorn OS Lite. Lubuntu is just Ubuntu but with the LXQT desktop, which is extremely lightweight, but just modern enough to be usable in 2019. It isn't very modern, but it's just modern enough to be usable, so it's like crossing the line between being light and modern. Lubuntu is probably the lightest of these candidates though, because most of the others use XFCE, while Lubuntu uses LXQT. Xubuntu is just Ubuntu but with XFCE. XFCE is very light and it's way more modern than LXQT is. XFCE is slightly more system heavy, but a lot of people think it's worth the small cost of performance for all the extra features you get in XFCE in comparison to LXQT. Peppermint is an interesting one. It's another Ubuntu-based distro, but it's actually using LXDE. Now, even though it's running LXDE, it's actually using XFCE's panel, which means it feels like XFCE, but it's also lighter. Peppermint also has ICE, which allows you to make site-specific browsers. This essentially lets you turn your desktop apps into web apps. It's a similar concept to how Chrome OS works. Peppermint OS also comes with extra tools for making the system easier to manage, so that way if you have issues with your system, there's tools to help you fix it. Overall, this is definitely a distro to check out. Zorin OS Lite is yet another Ubuntu-based XFCE distro. The reason you'd want to use this one is because of how modern it is. When I first booted into it, I thought I had the wrong ISO. I actually mistaked this for the GNOME build. This is the most modern-feeling XFCE distribution I've ever used, and it also has other features such as the Zorin OS layout switchers and an accent color chooser. This is my favorite of the bunch. And finally, we have Linux Lite. Quite a few people suggested this one as a candidate, but really, the main reason to use this is Light Tools, which allows for easier system maintaining. But Peppermint OS has a similar feature, and according to my German friend, it sucks for people who don't speak English. Interestingly though, Linux Lite actually won last year, so people no longer consider it the best lightweight distro, because Xubuntu actually won, with 33% of the votes, and Peppermint is close behind with 31%. Zorin OS Lite got 19% of the votes, and Lubuntu got 10%, which means that Linux Lite only got 8% of the votes, so it went from being winner last year to the 5th best lightweight distro. It still is a candidate, but it's not the best anymore. Next up, we have the best distros for gaming. These distros are the ones with the newest drivers, as well as extra features to make gaming easier on Linux. Our candidates are Salient OS, Manjaro, Solus, and Xubuntu. Salient OS is Arch-based, which means that it actually has all of the newest drivers, and it also has an NVIDIA ISO for people who have NVIDIA graphics cards. It also has Steam pre-installed, and Steam actually works out of the box, while other Arch distros you have to install a bunch of multi-lab repositories and then get all the dependencies set up. Steam is kind of hard to set up on Arch. Salient OS also uses a very customized version of the XFCE desktop to make it feel more modern. It's actually one of my favorite XFCE implementations other than Zorin OS Lite. That's my favorite. Since it's using XFCE, it's going to be light, which means your games will have more system RAM and CPU and stuff like that in order to run. Now, Pop! OS is our next candidate. This is an Ubuntu-based distro with the GNOME desktop, and it also has newer drivers in its repository than Ubuntu does, and it is really easy to install Steam from the Pop! Shop. Because of this, Pop! OS has been considered one of the best gaming distros for a while. It even got featured on Linus Tech Tips for his Gaming on Linux episode. Pop! OS is using the GNOME desktop, but that doesn't seem to affect performance because it runs games very well. Manjaro is another popular distro for gaming. It's Arch-based, but it delays updates until they're ready, which means that Manjaro is going to be more stable than Arch is, but it's still going to have the newest graphics drivers. Manjaro also has Steam pre-installed, and, like Pop! OS, it even got featured in Linus Tech Tips Gaming on Linux episode. Our next candidate is Solus, because its budgie desktop is very light yet modern still, and Solus also comes with Steam Linux integration, which helps you get some fixes done for different games. This is a feature that helps you get some games working that aren't working properly. But the issue with Solus is, while it's fine now, it kind of lost its gaming reputation after the YouTuber EG did a video, Distro Devels episode on Solus. At the time, there was this bug that made games run horribly, so in the video it got inconsistent gaming performance. And this kind of wrecked Solus's reputation as a gaming distro, because it actually won Linux Awards last year, but people were telling me that they weren't going to switch to Solus because of that video. There's like 3 people who told me that. Another thing is Steam Linux integration is not exclusive to Solus anymore. The distro Clear Linux also has Steam Linux integration, and on distros like Manjaro and Salient and other Arch-based distros, you can actually install it off of the AUR, which means that you can get it on any Arch-based distro. Finally, people are suggesting Xubuntu just because it was lightweight and still modern enough, and it was a candidate last year, so I thought, what the heck, might as well include it. The winner of this award goes to Pop! OS with 47% of the votes. That's almost half of the people voting who voted for Pop! OS. Manjaro came in at a distant second with 24%, Solus got 13%, Salient got 11%, and Xubuntu got a whopping 4%. I'm actually surprised by how well Solus did, because even though it was the winner last year, it still had its reputation wrecked by that EG video. Next up, we have the best distro for that poor soul who still has a netbook. Now, next year I think I'm going to drop this category because it's pretty similar to the best lightweight distro, but this year I'm still going to do it. Now, this one only has 3 candidates, Peppermint, Lubuntu, and Xubuntu, because those were the only 3 suggestions that I got multiple comments for. Now, Peppermint OS uses LXDE, but with the XFCE panel, so it would run better than regular XFCE because of the LXDE backend, but it still feels like XFCE because of its panel. And it also includes ICE for site-specific browsers and system management tools. Now, the heavy implementation of web apps makes this a good distro for netbooks, since netbooks are made for browsing the web. So that's why I personally think Peppermint OS is the best netbook distro. The other candidates are just Lubuntu because it's super light, and Xubuntu because it's light yet modern enough to use. And the winner is Peppermint OS with 56% of the votes.
Wow, I'm surprised.
Xubuntu got 24% of the votes, while Lubuntu just got 20%. Next, we have the best distro for people switching from Windows. These are the distros that have similar layouts to Windows, so people switching from Windows are right at home. This is also key because Windows 7 is about to commit the active rope choke, so users might be looking for alternatives. The candidates are Farron OS, the developer watches my videos, Zorin OS, they sent me a review copy of Zorin OS Ultimate, and Linux Mint. Farron OS is a Plasma distro with a layout similar to Windows, but he put the clock at the top for some reason. There's also a layout switcher where you can get the layout to be Cupertino, or Mac OS, Familiar, or Windows 10, a Farron layout, Redmond layout, or Windows 95, tablet mode, and an Ubuntu Unity layout. It also has an accent colorizer, which I mentioned earlier, and this makes the theme very easy to customize. So this is what you'd want to use if you want something easy to customize, but also good for Windows users. I do wish it had a Windows XP layout with basically a panel similar to the Redmond layout, but with a Windows XP or Windows 7 style menu, and then something similar where you have the familiar layout, which is Windows 10, except with a Windows 7 menu. But overall, this is a good distro. Next up, we have Zorin OS. This is a GNOME distro with a layout similar to Windows. Got a layout switcher with a Windows 7 layout, a Windows XP layout, and a touch layout, which is similar to Chrome OS. But if you pay $40 for Ultimate, then you also get a Mac OS layout, a Unity layout, and a standard GNOME 3 layout. It also has an accent color picker that is, in my opinion, better than Farron's because of how easy to use it is. Zorin with GNOME just seems more user-friendly in general than Farron OS does because of the GNOME desktop, but they're both still pretty user-friendly. And our last candidate is Linux Mint, which has a layout similar to Windows 7, but in its welcome screen you could choose a layout similar to Windows XP. It also has a stable and amazing update manager and software center, which Farron OS also uses, and TimeShift, which is its backup tool. And yeah, overall, I think this is actually the best overall operating system, not just for a Linux user, but for someone who just wants something that works. Someone who doesn't want to go on the web to find exe files and just wants to use the App Center. Someone who doesn't care about updating because of how easy it is to update with Linux Mint. They can really only do it when they have to and they won't get forced updates. And that's why I think that Linux Mint is the best overall operating system. And the winner is Linux Mint with 62% of the votes. Zorin got 22% and Farron got 16% of the votes. macOS Catalina is a funny joke. So, since macOS Catalina sucks, let's go over the best distro for people switching from macOS. Similar to Windows, this is the distro that has a similar layout to macOS, but also macOS has a lot of polish, so these distros also have a lot of polish. Elementary is a distro with a lot of polish and an ecosystem. Just like macOS, its layout is similar to macOS, but it also has a weird setup for the window buttons where it has an X button on the right and a maximize button on the left. Why not have a minimize button? You can literally double click to maximize, but there's still a maximize button. It does have all of the polish that macOS does and an ecosystem, so because of that, I think macOS users would find a good place with that. However, in order to get how most macOS users want it to be, with a minimize button and stuff, they'd have to install elementary tweaks, and that could be a pain for a new macOS user or a macOS user switching to Linux. Now, Ubuntu Budgie is a modern distro with a layout straight out of macOS. It's got your notifications in the Raven menu in the top right, just like macOS. It's also got a top bar and a dock. This distro is probably the most similar to macOS. It has a similar layout, although it doesn't have as much of an ecosystem as macOS does because it's using the Budgie desktop but with GNOME apps, and the GNOME Software Center can be a pain because of how broken it is. And finally, we got Deepin, your favorite Ubuntu based, or is it Debian based? I don't know, it's one of those two. This layout has everything on one dock, including your system tray. I don't really like this. I think that the layout would be better if it had a top bar with your time and system tray and everything, and then the dock would be just your applications similar to macOS, but instead, for whatever reason, they decided to put the system tray on the dock. Anyways, the winner is Elementary with a whopping 73% of the votes, and Ubuntu Budgie got 16% and Deepin got 11%. Now for the most stable distro. Let's be real, it's gonna be Debian stable. The candidates are Debian, Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Linux Mint Debian Edition, and Slackware. Debian is known for being stable, and it does have an older version of some of its software, but overall you're not gonna match anything in terms of stability with Debian. Ubuntu is based on Debian, and it's a base for an entire metric ton of distros. But its GNOME build is kind of sucks, and it crashes a lot, but it still is a stable base for other distros. Linux Mint gets the stability of the Ubuntu base, but with stability of the Cinnamon desktop too. It also has all the codecs and stuff you need pre-installed, which means it's going to be easier to set up than Ubuntu and Debian. Also based on the LTS versions of Ubuntu, which is arguably more stable than the non-LTS Ubuntus. Linux Mint Debian Edition gets the stability of Cinnamon, but also the stability of using pure Debian. Someone told me that also takes them a year to update to the new Debian base when it comes out. That way, all the bugs from the new Debian releases get ironed out before Linux Mint Debian Edition gets updated. And because of that, Linux Mint Debian Edition is actually more stable than regular Debian, according to someone who told me that. I'll see if I'll put the comment on screen that said that. And now Slackware is the candidate. I don't actually know anything about Slackware, but it got suggested by 2 people, so I decided to include it. As for the results, 2% voted for Linux Mint Debian Edition, 5% voted for Slackware, 11% for Ubuntu, 21% for Linux Mint, and 61% for pure Debian.
Wow, I'm surprised.
Yeah, me too. And now the most customizable but easy to install distro. For the candidates, we got Manjaro Architect, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, and EndeavourOS. Manjaro Architect is a command line installer for Manjaro that supports several desktop environments and applications. It has a little bit of a learning curve, but it's still pretty easy to use. OpenSUSE's Tumbleweed Net Installer has a somewhat hidden-ish feature in its installer that allows you to select your desktop environment and a bunch of other things when you're installing it. These options are a little bit hidden, and the user probably wouldn't know how to get to them, and I actually discovered this feature on mistake, but it is still there, and I have a video on how to do it, which I'll link in the card on the top right. And finally, EndeavourOS. Its Net Installer allows you to choose several desktops and things while you're installing it. The Net Installer actually did come out the same day I put the poll up for this, for the Linux Awards for this category, which means that a lot of people haven't gotten to experience the Net Installer yet, and because of that, I feel like it kind of got the shaft inside of the votes. However, I also released a video the day after on Net Installer, so I think that it is kind of fair, but I don't know. Spoiler alert, it did not win the award this year, but I feel like it will win next year. Anyways, Manjaro Architect got 64% of the votes, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed got 9%, and EndeavourOS got 27%. So even though the Net Installer still did come out on the same day of the poll, it still did pretty good. So now, on December 30th, I put a survey in my Discord and community tab. This survey asked what distro people were running and what they were running as their favorite distro, as well as what their favorite distro base is. Now, I got some interesting results. Now, only 20 people took the survey, but the results are still interesting. So, Ubuntu is the most popular distro, with 25% of people who took the surveys using it, which means 5 out of 20 people use Ubuntu. And Linux Mint was the second most popular, with 20% of server tiers using it. And the third most popular distro was a tie between Pure Arch and Pure Debian. Interestingly though, only 60% of people were actually running their favorite distro. 40% were actually running a distro that isn't their favorite, which means that maybe their favorite distro isn't for their specific use case. For example, Fedora is actually my favorite, but as a YouTuber, I like to have the newest software to showcase in my videos, so that's why I'm running Arch. Finally, 31.81% of people were running Arch-based distros, 54.54% of people were running Ubuntu-based distros, and 13.63% were running Pure Debian. Keep in mind that a couple of people said that they ran multiple distros on multiple computers, so these percentages are actually out of 22 distros instead of 20, but whatever. Anyways, this is interesting because 35% of people said they prefer Arch distros, while only 30% said they prefer Ubuntu-based distros, which interests me because more than half of the people who took the survey run Ubuntu-based distros. 25% also said they prefer Debian, while only one person preferred Fedora-based distros, and one person likes Slackware distros. I'm interested in getting a larger sample size, so if you are interested in the survey, it will be linked in the description below, and in around a month, I'm going to make a second video on the survey. In conclusion, those are the distros that were awarded the award for the Best Distro Award in certain categories. Anyways, I have a Watch Mojo Top 10 to finish. And the number one distro on DistroWatch is MX Linux. Alright, thanks for watching this video. I've been working on it this entire month, collecting data for the poll, and of course scripting and editing. If you like this video, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon so I could buy a PinePhone soon. Speaking of Patreon, thanks to Michelle Vantino for supporting me at the highest tier on Patreon, and also thanks to Switch to Linux, Linux and Other Projects, and EG for giving me permission to use their clips of Linux distros for this video. Also, I hope everybody has a great decade.